So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to How to Build a Compelling Resume, a Loudoun County Public Library program with Sheila Murphy. I'm Lorraine Moffa, Programming Coordinator for Loudoun County Public Library, and your host today. Please feel free to send me any comments, questions you may have during the program by using the chat feature. I can then relay them to our speaker. And it's my pleasure to introduce that speaker, Sheila Murphy, partner and co-founder of Flex Professionals, a firm that matches experienced professionals seeking meaningful part-time employment with growing businesses in need of top talent. Featured on the Today Show, Sheila is a career re-entry expert, work flexibility advocate, and seasoned speaker and trainer on a variety of job search and career development topics. Welcome, Sheila, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Lorraine, as always, and welcome everybody. As Lorraine and I were just saying, it's this gorgeous day out, so thank you for being here. I will try to keep this to just an hour, so to be respectful of your time. This is the agenda in front of you, but we're going to talk today about resumes and hopefully address this presentation is really targeted also to any job seeker who's looking to update their resume, but specifically for people who have challenges with their resume because of career gaps, or perhaps you're looking to transition to do something new and you're looking for ways to tweak your resume to reflect that. So that's our agenda for today, a little bit about Flex Professionals. I will be quick, but I do want you to know where I am coming from with all of my thoughts and comments. And also, I believe that we can be a resource to many of you who are job seekers. So I own a company named Flex Professionals with two other amazing women. We serve the DMV area. We've got a great account executive that works in Loudoun, and we work with lots of Loudoun employers who love to hire candidates from Loudoun County. And essentially, we are a staffing firm, but we're different. Our specialty, our niche is part-time, whether that means project work, working permanently for a company, just not working 40 hours. Part-time can be anywhere from 10 hours a month to 32 hours a week. And we work with a lot of small businesses, helping them embrace a flexible work model in order for them to bring on a higher level of talent. And that talent is people like you. We work with a lot of caregivers. The model is great for a caregiver. Oftentimes, we are working with people who are looking to scale back from full-time to meet demands at home, or people who are actually have been not working in caregiving and are looking to re-enter the workforce. And then we also work with a lot of what we call second career professionals. So people who aren't quite ready to retire, but they don't want to work full-time anymore. So enough about us. If you leave this webinar early, my hope is that this is the one takeaway, your one big takeaway, which is most people who are making decisions about whether to hire you or not, or whether to interview you or not, or whether to pass your resume along to somebody else, they're barely looking at your resume. They maybe spend 20 seconds looking at it before they make some kind of decision. I look at hundreds of resumes every week, and I would say that I spend less than 20 seconds looking at somebody's resume before I make a decision about what I'm going to do with it. So think of your resume as expensive real estate. Understand that people are lazy readers. If they're only spending 15, 20 seconds on your resume, they're not going to get your whole career story off the bat. So you need to think about this in terms of crafting a resume. A 10-page resume, a 5-page resume, 3-page resume, people are probably not going to look beyond the first page if they're only spending 20 seconds. So that's your challenge. You're dealing with lazy readers. You're dealing, you must also recognize that it's an art, not a science, to write a resume. So if you came here today for me to tell you exactly what you need to do, you're going to be disappointed. Don't look for a beautifully formatted resume and try to fit your story into somebody else's format, because generally speaking, it's not going to work. And I can guarantee you, if you send your resume to 10 different people to get feedback, you're going to get 10 different opinions. So some of the things I tell you about today is based on my work experience working with job seekers, and not just job seekers, but working with clients. But at the end of the day, you have to own your resume. And so if I tell you something or somebody else tells you something, make this change, make that change, and that change doesn't resonate with you, don't do it. Just because somebody has a bigger title or just because somebody is a career coach doesn't mean that they know everything about you or about how your resume, what your resume should look like. And I would even argue that if somebody tells you to do something with your resume without asking you, what do you want to do next? That the information they give you could be wrong. So just really important to think about as you go through this today. So what is a resume? It's a lot of different things, right? It's telling a little bit about your skills. You're going to sprinkle in there things about your own personal qualities, your personality traits. It's going to be very much about your accomplishments. This is something that's very different for people who have been out of work for a while. It's more about your accomplishments than your job duties. It's a little bit about your work history, but more than anything else, it's simply to entice somebody. So what I would love for you to think about today is to try to kind of reframe the art of resume writing and think about your resume being more of a reflection of what you want to do in the future and less of a reflection of what you did in the past. So most people take their resume when they go to update it and they look at it and all they want to do is cram in every single thing they've done in the past, every job responsibility, and try to get it all in there on a piece of paper. Instead, start to think about what you want to do and start to try to craft a resume that looks more like the professional self you want to be than the professional self you were. And we'll talk more about this as we go through. So in order to do that, to make your resume look more like your future self, you really have to take some time to think about what it is you want to do and what type of company you want to work for and what type of skills you want to use in your next job. What are your passions? This is the hard work of the resume. And a lot of times people who are looking for work automatically go and start to put pen to paper and start to update their resume. But I would argue that if you don't think about what it is that you want to do and what skills you want to use, your resume is going to fall flat. I oftentimes will interview people and I look at their resume and I interview them for 20 minutes and they're all over the place on the resume. And I will say to them, so how can I help you? What is it that you want to do? And sometimes they look up at me and they give me a blank look and they'll say something like, well, I'm not sure. I'm really open. By saying you're open, it's not telling me a lot. So you want your resume to be tight and to reflect, at least if you don't know what you want to do, reflect the skills that you have. So how do you do this? So take some time before you put pen to paper and really start to do some self-exploration and some career exploration. So here's just a simple, a couple of questions that you need to ask yourself. So the first one is, what types of characteristics do I have that I consistently convey no matter what the job is, no matter where I am, no matter who I'm with, no matter what I'm doing? what are my personality traits that are the strongest? And you might say to me, well, why is that important for a resume? You're not going to have a section on your resume about your personality traits, but you're going to sprinkle in some of those things, perhaps in your summary, and you're going to want to demonstrate some of those strongest characteristics, perhaps in your accomplishments. So an example I would give you, and this is what's tricky. Oftentimes we'll have a client, an employer, who has a job posting for, let's just say, a project manager. And maybe they have a team of analysts, a team of project managers, and everybody on that team are really creative. They're outside the box thinkers. They love to brainstorm, but they can't stick to a deadline. They don't handle the details very well, and they don't meet deadlines and timelines and goals. And so maybe I'm advertising for that project manager or analyst role. In the job description, it doesn't say much about needing somebody who needs to stick to deadlines, but I need that type of person. And so if you on your resume show through your personal characteristics that you're really detail oriented, you're really organized, you're really good at sticking to deadlines, I might see that, and I might have another resume of an equally qualified analyst or project manager that's the creative outside of the box person. I'm going to choose you because you are going to round out my team. So that's why you have to think of those characteristics, include them on your resume, and talk about them in interviews. And then the second thing is, what skills do you have? So you might not know exactly the kind of job you want next, but your resume needs to reflect what are your top skills that transfer across any work setting and that you want to use in your next job. And so that second piece of that sentence is super important. I have skills that I have demonstrated. I have demonstrated accomplishments with those skills, but I don't want to use those skills in my next job. So for example, maybe I can sell really well, but I don't want a sales job anymore. Well, then that's not a skill, even though you have it, that you're going to want to highlight on your resume. You're going to highlight the ones that you use. And when I'm talking skills here, I'm talking like 2, 3, or 4 key skills. If you have 20 of them on your resume, it's often information overload to the reader, and they're going to look at it and go, I really need somebody with these 2 skills for this job. This person has like 15 skills on their resume. I don't know what to do with them. I don't think they want this job. And they're going to put you in the no pile. So keep it focused, keep it narrow. It doesn't mean that you can't target your resume and insert one skill in for one resume and take it out and insert another skill for a different resume. Okay. So what's really important here is narrowing it and targeting it to what you want to do next. So how do you do this? What are some resources? If you go to our website, on the bottom of this PowerPoint, you'll see our web address. Under our job seekers tab, we have tons of resources. We have job search resources, workplace readiness or workplace productivity resources, like the kind of skills that you need to hit the ground running on day one. And then we have technical skill resources. But in our job search resources, we have, you can see it here on this PowerPoint slide, we have lots of different worksheets for you to go through and sort of do this self-exploration. So the first one here is this personal qualities worksheet. It's a whole bunch of adjectives. Go through it. What adjectives resonate with you? What truly reflect who you are? Maybe you can narrow it down to 20 adjectives. Then do it again and say, of these 20 adjectives, is this who I want to be, or is this who I really am? Narrow it down further. Then you'll find you can probably group some of these adjectives together to come up with 1 or 2 that are really, really reflect who you are. So that's one resource for you. The other one that I would highlight up here is ONET. ONET is the Department of Labor's huge, robust website about jobs and careers. You can go there, you can learn about different jobs, you can search different jobs. It's going to give you all the skills and competencies needed. But they also have a test there. It's a 60-question test that you can take. It's called the ONET Interest Profiler, and they'll ask you questions, and based on your answers, they will tell you about careers that lend themselves well to your personality type. So it's another way of sort of learning about your personality and learning about what types of jobs would be well suited for your personality. So really good stuff to do before you start to really detail out your resume. In terms of functional skills, look at your old job descriptions. Look at past performance reviews. What did your bosses say about you, about what you're strongest at? On our website, there's a list of best skills for resumes. It's full of all sorts of different kinds of skills that you can go through and go, yes, this is definitely something I have. And if you know you have a skill and it's a top skill of yours, you should be able to have at least 2, 3, or 4 accomplishments, examples of things that you have done that demonstrate that you have that skill. And an accomplishment is a great way to demonstrate that you have a skill. Okay, so now that you've gone through, and that was a very shortened version of how do you go about kind of doing that self-assessment about what it is that are your strongest skills and traits. But now that you have done that, and I'd also argue that part of what you want to do when you're doing that self-assessment is also to think about what type of work environment would be good for me and what type of work values do I have? Are you a sole contributor? Are you a team player? Do you like the back office? Do you like to be at a desk? Do you like to be in front of customers and moving around? All of those things you ought to be thinking about as you make that next move. So now that you've done that, again, we're not even hitting the paper yet. The next thing you need to think about is, okay, so now that I know what skills I have and what my top personality traits are, do I have examples of how I've used those skills? What examples do I have? What accomplishments do I have? Because this really is what's changed most with resumes. You want your resume full of accomplishments, not job duties. So I'm just going to show you kind of how you go about doing that and why you should do that. So if I were to read a resume, and I'll give you an example, maybe an HR manager, and I read an HR manager's resume, and it was all about job duties. So maybe it was updated employment policies and procedures, managed employee review process, managed benefits administration. I could look at that person's resume and go, okay, well, they're qualified to be an HR manager, but it wouldn't impress me. It's just showing me that they're qualified, right? But if I had an HR manager's resume that had accomplishment bullets, like something like this, was the first hire for XYZ startup and grew their HR function or HR department from the ground up, growing the company from 50 to 150 employees in 12 months. That's something that's going to catch my interest, especially if my company is a startup. I have about 50 employees and I want to grow my company and I don't have an HR department yet and I need somebody to help me create that. That person's resume is going to catch my attention. So accomplishments engage the reader. They allow the reader to connect dots about what you can do for them. It makes you memorable and distinguishes you from somebody else. And so that is why you want your story to focus on accomplishments. And that is what you want to talk about in an interview. And I can't tell you how many times we have clients who decided not to hire somebody because that person wasn't quite the right fit for what they needed at the time. But then they call us back and they say, remember that person? She organized an entire office move. She moved 500 people from Maryland to Virginia, and she found the office space and helped to organize the office space and buy printers and computers and blah, blah, blah. I want to talk to that person because we're going to move and I need somebody to help me. So that's those types of accomplishments that make you memorable that will ultimately allow you to be hireable. So how do you do that? Use this, it's called the STAR approach. I've sort of even simplified it a little bit further, but basically think about what you've done in prior jobs or in your volunteer work. Doesn't have to be paid work. Think about a problem that you solved or a challenge that you faced or an opportunity that you seized upon. So what was that? What was that problem or challenge or opportunity? What did you do? What actions did you take? And then what was the result? So how did maybe the company benefit? How did maybe a customer benefit? Or what impact did what you have, what you did, what impact did that have on somebody else? If you can quantify it, even better, but don't make it up. If you can't quantify it, that's okay. So if you can, use numbers, use percentages, increases, decreases, revenue amounts, budget amounts, that would be great. Here's another tip here or another link for you for accomplishments from the balance at the end of this PowerPoint, which is really helpful as well. So I'm going to give you some examples of these accomplishments just to kind of give you a sense of how you would go about doing this. And what we have found is that oftentimes people have a hard time articulating their accomplishments. And when they start to actually do it and dissect it and break down, they often will tell a story about an accomplishment. And in the end, they're actually talking about 2 or 3 accomplishments. So talk to somebody about this. Find somebody, a partner that you can talk to and tell them your career story and let them help you tease out what your key accomplishments are. So here's just an example from my own company. So we started to organize workshops and present at webinars because we had so many job seekers coming into our company. And if we interviewed all of them, we'd go out of business. But we wanted to get exposure to them and to meet them because we know that if we meet job seekers, it's the best way for us to then connect them to employers. So we started to coordinate workshops. So I could put down on my resume that I coordinated workshops for job seekers. It's a job duty. It's perfectly acceptable, but it's not that impressive. A little bit better is I can quantify it a little bit, and I can say what types of what types of workshops they are and what happened. So conducted 15 plus job search workshops, which expanded company outreach and supported job seekers. An even better accomplishment bullet, again, if you can see here on the last one, I'm using a stronger verb. I'm quantifying both the numbers of workshops and I'm putting some context around it annually. And I'm also talking about how much did I increase company outreach. In this case, it was by 25%. So that's just an example how you can take a job duty and you can strengthen it by making it more like an accomplishment. So here's just some more examples. We worked with the magazine editor for USA Weekend, the Sunday supplement. And she could just write, she edited the Sunday supplement. She could say that, and that would be true. But if you look at her accomplishment, it's incorporating both a job duty, but it's also incorporating some impact, some benefit. So in this case, she edited more than 50% of each weekly issue of USA Weekend magazine, maintained standards of quality, as well as harmonious relationships with high-profile writers, despite a 75% reduction in editorial staff. So if I'm looking at her resume and I read that bullet, and I need an editor for a publication, I know a bunch of things here. I know that she's efficient. I know that she has good communication skills if she was able to maintain harmonious relationships with high-profile writers. And I also know that staff was significantly reduced and they chose to keep her. So that bullet is telling me a lot of things that's going to make me say, you know what, I think I'd like to talk to her. So that's why this is so important. So here's another example. So this is a guy who we interviewed who was basically an Excel, he was an Excel guru. He was an analyst and he created dashboards and he was an advanced user of Excel to basically create lots of efficiencies and processes. So for this guy's resume, you might want to add at times in your resume a duty so that you give somebody context. So for this one, for the Budget Office of the U.S. Army, he analyzed processes and created tools to eliminate redundancies. But those two accomplishments are really showing his value there, where he was able to eliminate 28 hours of manual work from a 14-person team, or that he created an interface for analyzing, billions of dollars in funding in order to produce like very sophisticated reports that were presented to Congress. So those are kinds of things that's going to make him stand out. Here's just a few more tips for demonstrating results and for focusing on accomplishments. Focus on the accomplishments you're most proud of. Why? When you interview, when you talk about those, you're going to talk about them with positivity and with passion and energy, and that's what's going to get you hired. So it doesn't matter if they're paid or unpaid. You can have lots of accomplishments for volunteer work. If those accomplishments are aligned with what you want to do next, absolutely put them on your resume. Make them stand out. Make sure that every bullet on your resume under your professional experience, put in before the bullet, I deserve a raise because. And if you don't, if it's kind of a blah bullet, take it out of your resume. Like I said, it's expensive real estate. Don't dilute the good stuff by putting in filler. Okay. And then make sure you use a really strong action verb, but make sure it's accurate. Okay. Because otherwise, if you overinflate what you did, and I ask you in a resume and I say, well, tell me about the time that you led 50 people. And then you turn around and say, well, I didn't really lead 50 people. I was just a blah, blah, blah frontline person. Then you're totally devaluing what you did. Okay. Lorraine, do we have any questions or do you want me to keep on going?
The only questions we have are people asking whether or not this is being recorded, and it is being recorded and will be on the library's YouTube channel. Any other questions you have as we go along, please do type them in the chat box and I can interrupt Sheila and ask her. Thanks,
Okay.
Sheila.
So this is the section where we usually get the most questions because now we're going to put the pen to paper. But if you do what we just did for the first half hour of this webinar, it's going to make it easier for you to do this. So that's why we spend so much time up front talking about the importance of reflecting and accomplishments. So now we're going to go put it on paper. I'm going to go through this piece of the presentation, starting at the top of your resume. It's typically at the top and moving down. Having said that, I'm just doing that to give it some structure to this part of the webinar. Don't think that because I have professional experience first and then community leadership or volunteer experience that you have to have it that way on your resume. You can move sections around depending upon what you want to do next, depending upon what your strengths are, depending upon your career story. So I'm just doing this for structure. You can even change the headings, the headers. Some people have volunteer experience. Other people put community leadership experience. Some people have education as a header on their resume. Other people have education, certifications, and licenses. So depending upon what you have, you can change up the wording of the different headers. So just to take one quick step back, there's two different kinds of resumes, generally speaking. There's a chronological resume and there's a functional or skills-based resume. So we often get a lot of questions about what resume should I use? And the answer is it depends. So I'm going to explain to you the differences between the two resumes and the pros and cons and give you my personal opinion. But like I said earlier, rules can be broken, and some resumes are better for some people than and other resumes are better for other people. So the chronological resume is probably the resume that you're most used to seeing. It is the resume where your most recent work experience is at the top of your resume, and then you work backwards from there so that your entry level or experience farthest back is later in your resume. And I see a lot of chronological resumes that start with your most recent job. But I would highly encourage you to start your chronological resume with a summary of your qualifications or your skills at the top of your resume. And we'll talk about this as we go. Assume that somebody is only going to spend 20 seconds. They might just read that one paragraph or those few bullets at the top of your resume that is sort of your career summary. That's really important to have, especially if you're trying to transition, because your current job title might not reflect what you want to do next. And so having that summary up at the top to let people know what your top skills are and what you want to do next is really important. The advantage of a chronological resume is that it's easy to follow. I, as a hiring manager, can take a look at that resume and I can very quickly go down, see your job titles, see your companies, and figure out, okay, this person worked here for 10 years, and then they worked here for 6 months, and then they worked there for 3 years. I can figure out your story. And the more quickly I can figure out your story, the more likely I can make a decision to put you in the yes or no pile. The disadvantage of a chronological resume is that if you're out of work right now, your gap is pretty obvious. If you have an extended gap because of caregiving or because of health reasons, for example, that gap is obvious. Same thing with job hopping. Your movement between jobs is more obvious. That's the disadvantage. This is an example of a chronological resume. So you'll see the summary of qualifications at the top. This person has about 5 bullets. And then you go right into the professional experience with the title, the company, the amount of years worked, and the bullets. The second type of resume is a skills-based resume or functional resume. So this resume doesn't have the bullets underneath the company and the job title. Instead, it has it highlights a person's skills, and then the bullets are underneath that. And then at the bottom of the resume is a brief work history. So the advantage of this resume is that it might work better for people re-entering. It may be for people in transition. It also sometimes works really well for somebody who has had the same job over and over, but has just done that job at different companies. So an example of that would be like a paralegal. You've been a paralegal for 30 years. And if you showed every single job where you were a paralegal and every single duty under that job, it would be really repetitive. So instead, you might just do a skills-based resume and then put your work history down. Accountants sometimes that fall into that similar situation. The disadvantage of this resume is sometimes it looks like you're hiding something. So my recruiting manager always says to me that when she interviews somebody with a skills-based resume, she's drawing arrows. Here's this bullet of an accomplishment. Okay, where did you do that? For what company? Oh, and she draws the arrow down to the bottom of the work history. Oh, for how long were you there? And so for that reason, my personal preference is a chronological resume, because if I have to spend so much time asking you those kinds of questions, then it's kind of wasting our time. I'd rather kind of get into the substance of what you've done and not spend so much time trying to figure out your career story. So for that reason, I tend to like the chronological resume, but the functional resume sometimes is really helpful for somebody And I'll give you another example. Somebody who has been out of work for 10 years, does not want to go back to what they did before they left the workforce, has found their passion doing volunteer work. Say it's event planning. They've organized lots of different events for lots of different volunteer groups. But a functional resume might be a much better way for them to explain that than a chronological. So that's just an example for you. And here's what a chronological resume looks like. Again, you see the core competencies. Those are highlighting sort of accomplishments based on the skills that they have above that. And then at the very bottom is just a brief listing of their professional experience. Okay, so starting at the top of the resume, contact information. Just one quick tip. Sometimes taking your name, you always want your name to pop. When I write resumes, I typically put the name in bold. I typically use 18, 20, 24 point font. The contact information, I put much smaller, like 10 or 11 point font. And I tend to double click on the header, and I take that information, I put it up into the header. It almost gives you like another inch of space on your resume if you put all of that information in a header. So that's what I do. Definitely have one phone number, not two. That just leaves room for error. Give the one phone number where you are going to absolutely check your messages. Use that phone number. A city and state, and I would even say zip code is important. In our applicant tracking system, we do a lot of searches based on geographic location. And make sure you have a professional email address. So I wouldn't put anything like, soccermom@gmail.com. I would keep it professional. And include your LinkedIn profile as long as it furthers your professional brand. So what do I mean by that? If you're not active on LinkedIn, if you don't have any LinkedIn connections, don't put your LinkedIn profile on your resume. If by clicking on your LinkedIn profile, I'm going to see a picture, I'm going to see that you have at least 250 connections, and I'm going to see that you're active, then that would be a good thing to put on your resume. So after your contact information, regardless of the type of resume you use, we strongly suggest that you have a section at the top that is a summary of your qualifications. So whatever, you can call it many different things. It could be I tend to use the word profile. I've seen summary, highlights, qualifications, qualification summary, whatever it is that you call it, you want this to be 3 to 5 sentences or 3 to 5 bullets that if I didn't read anything else on your resume, I would know what you bring to the table for me as the employer. So you're going to give a little bit about your experience, a little bit about your skills. You're going to add some sizzle if you can. So what do I mean by sizzle? Sizzle will be something that is impressive. So I once did a resume for a writer, and she did a lot of speech writing. She did a lot of journalism. And she told me at the end of the interview that she has gotten a lot of her articles placed in the Wall Street Journal. I'm like, that's your sizzle. That should go at the top of your resume. Not only are you a journalist, but what separates you from somebody else is that you were published in the Wall Street Journal. That's an example of sizzle that you might put in your profile. Another example would be if you are a Big Four, you are an accountant and you were trained by one of the Big Four accounting firms, the Deloittes of the world. That is something that you would want to put up and highlight in your profile. Lastly, this is a great time, that last sentence of your profile, to let people know, hey, I've been out of work for 5 years, but I haven't been sitting around eating bonbons. How do you do that? You say that you write a sentence in that profile saying you are eager to re-enter the workforce. Don't go into a lot of details, but after a career break, or eager to obtain a bookkeeping position after a career break, or eager to transition from sales into marketing so that you can use your creative side, something like that. So this is a good place to let people know what it is you're looking for and why you're interested in the job that they're advertising for. So here's an example of a profile. This one's just 3 or 4 sentences. If I read it though, this is a results-oriented professional, known for driving growth, organized, relationship builder, thrives in a fast-paced environment. So my question is, what can this person do for me, the employer? Is this person a sales and marketing professional, operations, biz dev? Based on what this person put on their resume, I have no idea, which is not helpful to me as the employer. So sometimes it's great language, it's well written, but sometimes being vague and having too much fluff isn't helpful to the employer. So here's the same resume, the same person, but much more specific here. They're a business development professional known for driving growth. They have worked for mid-sized FedGov IT government contractors. They're successful in developing relationships within DoD, DOJ. So if I'm a government contractor, I need to hire my first biz dev person, and I'm really looking to get into the Department of Defense, I'd want to talk to this person. So that's why this is really important. Now, if this person doesn't want to do business development for federal government contractors anymore, they want to get into the private commercial space, then I would probably have this person tweak this profile a little bit. I might take out the federal government. I might take out building relationships with DoD. I might have them add some examples of relationships they built with other commercial companies, right? So you have to tweak your resume for what you're looking, tweak your profile for what you're looking for. So after the profile is where we get to your professional experience. So my tip here is don't hide the substance, don't hide the good stuff. So sometimes people who have gaps in their resumes, who are out of work, are so concerned about that gap that they add too much filler. So maybe you're out of work and you're working at a retail store just to make ends meet until you get that next real job that you want in IT project management. I'm not so sure I would put the retail experience first, because then it's gonna confuse the reader, and you want them to know if you have good project management experience prior, you want to elevate the experience that is most relevant to what you want to do next. So for some people, if you have a career gap, maybe you found your passion during doing volunteer work, and maybe the work that you did for a organization was so significant and you spent a good amount of time, like maybe it was part-time, 20 hours a week. Maybe I would put that in my professional experience. Otherwise, it can go in the volunteer experience. So depending upon your story and depending upon what you want to do next, this section is going to look different for different people. But no matter what, you want your company name to pop. You want your job title to pop. So I always advise people use a different font or use bold or differentiate the company name from your title. Maybe bold for one, italic for the other. And people always ask me, so what should I put first, my company name or my job title? And it really depends. It's a personal preference, but I would say, what's more impressive? Do the companies that you used to work for, are they big name companies that I would recognize? Or is your job title more impressive? So sometimes that can be an indicator of how you want to do it, but either way works. And most importantly, provide start and end dates. Sometimes people who have gaps have a tendency not to do that. Make sure you provide start and end dates. Otherwise, it looks like you're hiding something. Volunteer, community service, leadership experience. Doesn't matter what you name this section, but especially if you have a gap or if you're trying to transition and your volunteer experience shows that you have the skills that you want to use in your next job, by all means, put it on your resume. It doesn't have to, you don't have to put everything. Put the most substantive work, put the leadership roles, the roles where you had the most responsibility, and the roles that show that you utilize skills that you want to use next. So that's exactly what you want to put in your volunteer experience. So here's a picture, a snapshot of a resume that we got. And this is typical for our model. We tend to get lots of stay-at-home moms that are looking to get back to work who have a wealth of volunteer experience. And this person put a whole bunch of their volunteer experience on their resume. The good news is that from this, I can tell she was an active volunteer, and I can tell she did a lot while on career break. That's the good news. The bad news is that she puts so much on here, it almost dilutes the good stuff. So here's a redo of this volunteer experience. It's shorter, but all the jobs on here are substantive. They're leadership roles. They show longevity, and they also, the way this is formatted, the volunteer organization pops, and so does the job title. So to me, this is much more impactful for to have in a resume than this first one. Okay, so just an example there of how sometimes less is better. Next section. Again, it doesn't have to be your next section, but generally speaking, the older you are, the more experienced you are, the lower your education and training goes on your resume. So it often goes after your experience. The one exception, and this is an important one, is that if you have taken a recent certification, or you've gone back to school, or you've done some type of upskilling while on career break, and that training that you have received is relevant to what you want to do next, you ought to put that at the top of your resume. So some people add that as like the last sentence or the last bullet on their summary of qualifications or profile. That's a good place to put it, especially the more technical you are. Otherwise, your education goes down towards the bottom of your resume. You don't need to include your year of graduation. It just makes it too easy for somebody to figure out how old you are. And that rule of thumb is typically for an older worker. You don't have to, especially if you graduated 20, 30 years ago, you don't need to include courseworks or clubs or honors. But if you do have an honor that is worthy of note, keep it in there. But this section should be concise and short. I often, when I write resumes, I combine education and skills. So I have the education, the university, the degree, and then I have proficient in, Microsoft Office Suite, comma, Google Suite, comma, Adobe Creative Suite, comma, MailChimp, whatever it is, I list them out. So for people that have gaps on their resumes, for older workers, it's really important that you show that you have basic workplace proficiency in Word, Excel, PowerPoint. Get those proficiencies and list them on your resume, because it's a big concern of employers that the older you are, you don't have those skills. So make sure you put them down on your resume. Again, you can combine the education skills, you can separate them out, you can add certificates, you can add memberships. Memberships are important for people who belong to a bar association, for lawyers, or the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, for HR professionals, or if you belong to a marketing association. Some of those things are important to put down. And any if you can show a level of proficiency, especially if you are intermediate or advanced, by all means put that down when it comes to your technical skills. So I'm almost done, and then I can take questions if you have them. But I hope that you see people talk about targeting resumes, and it is important that you look at job descriptions, that you look at openings, that you go for an informational interview, somebody asks you to send a resume, that you target it for the position that you think that company would be interested in you for, and using those keywords are really important. The one downside of targeting your resume is that sometimes it can lead to distorting what you've done. And if you over target and you start to distort your accomplishments and your job duties and your experience, it might get you the interview, but then when you walk into that interview and they ask you questions about your resume and you can't speak to them, you're not going to get the job. So be careful, making sure that you're authentic, making sure not to over present your accomplishments, but having I think it's really helpful to have like a bank of accomplishments, like in a Word document, have a bank of different accomplishments, different ways that you can word things that you can pull from onto a resume when you go to target it. That can be really helpful. Have that one go-to resume, that one resume. Sometimes people have different ways that they could go in their career. They could do a little bit of sales, but they could also do marketing, or they could do account management. Have that one resume, if you're not sure which way to go, has a little bit of each and kind of adequately reflects who you are and what you want to do. Sometimes people have to have two go-to resumes. Here's my sales resume, here's my operations resume. But try to keep one resume on hand, so if you're not quite sure, but you have the opportunity to quickly send your resume, you have one to send. And lastly here, I have tons of employers, if they see a spelling error on a resume or something that's kind of glaring, they're going to automatically assume that you don't have the attention to detail or the polish or the communication skills to work for them. So be very careful that you check your resume, you spell check it, you give it to somebody else. And I would also argue that saying something well and concise and saying it once is much better than filling in space because you feel like you're so worried about your gap that you repeat yourself, and you end up going down that rabbit hole. So say it once, say it well. Don't worry if it's a one-page resume. For people with career gaps, sometimes people in transition, the shorter the resume that's really impactful and substantive, the better. That is the end of my presentation. I can take questions. I'm going to throw up here my contact information. I'm Sheila Murphy. I'm the email to the right. That's who you're going to want to contact. Please link in with me, email me. We would love to see your resume. Again, we're a staffing firm. I always tell people we take resumes of all shapes and sizes. Don't wait. Don't hide behind your resume. Don't wait until it's perfect, because we might have a great job for you today. And if your resume isn't in our system, we can't help you. So there's no cost or obligation to send your resume into our system. You just have to go to our website. And we have hired we've placed rock star candidates with lousy resumes. So at some point, you just got to let that resume go and get it out there, and know that you can always update it. Even in our system, you can send your resume in, and then next month or next week, when you have a tweak to it or an improvement, you can just upload a new resume. So that's it for me, Lorraine.
Thank you so much, Sheila. I can't think of anything more important than good job searching advice. It really makes more efficient and, can make all the difference between getting a job and not getting a job. We do have a couple questions before I repeat those. I just want you all to know that the library on our website, we do have a database called Peterson's Career Prep, and that has all kinds of job hunting advice, how to build a resume, searching for new careers, and so on. And then this is being recorded and will be on Loudoun County Public Library's YouTube. Okay, Sheila, we know you said that it's ideal to have a one-page resume, but what if you have over 20 years experience? Is it okay to have it be more than one page?
Absolutely. So it's okay to have a one-page resume. You don't have to have a one page. You don't have to have a two-page. I would say to you though that after 2 pages, people will be less and less likely to look at them. So you want to make sure that anything above the fold on the first page, that's what people are going to look at. So make sure what you want to convey is above the fold of the first page. But if it has to go to 2.5 pages or 2.25 pages, I would rather see a resume that's 2.5 pages long than have that person cram and make the font super small and cram it all in, because for two reasons. One, if people are reading your resume that are my age, they can't see 10-point font. And number
Right.
two, people need more white space. That's why we really encourage bullets, a little bit of spacing, people, we're not used to reading left to right anymore. We're used to visuals, we're used to columns, we're used to seeing stuff much more graphically presented. I still think a simple resume that's not so fancy, unless you're a graphic designer, is better for these systems, but keeping some of that white space is really important too.
Okay. Are there any key differences in a commercial from a government resume?
Yes. What I spoke to you about today is really for the private sector. Writing a resume for the government is very different. They ask for every single detail. So I often tell people an example would be if if you're transitioning, or if you had a job, maybe you had a job for 6 months that you hated, and that just gives you a bad feeling when you talk about it. For the private sector, I would say take that off your resume. You don't need to have it on there. For the government, they want every single thing you've done practically since birth, and they want times and references and managers. So it's a different process, and I Google. There's a lot of information out there, and there are people that talk specifically for resumes for the federal government. So I'm not that person, but if you are looking for that, there's a lot of resources out there for that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Sheila? Looks like not today, Sheila.
Okay.
All right, thank you again, and thank you all for attending, and hope to see you next time.